Welcome back. It is 13 after 8 on AM. Trusts have been in the news lately and new trust tax rates are coming. But what are trusts used for and how do they work? Perpetual Guardian CEO Patrick Gamble is with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you here. So, first of all, because we can talk maybe a little bit about Michael Wood and his trust issues and a couple of other things. But first of all, what is a trust?
So trusts are very common in New Zealand and they're not particularly well understood. So there's a perception that trusts are something that the ultra-wealthy use or the ultra-wealthy exclusively use. And actually there's about 500,000 of them. So they're used by a lot of different Kiwis in a lot of different situations. They're, at their simplest, they're a legal vehicle that separates ownership and control of an asset from the benefits of owning that asset. And so you hand assets over to trustees, they then take on the rights and responsibilities, but they have to use those assets for the benefit of the beneficiaries you've specified. So it might be your children, might be your parents, might be a charity, there's all sorts of situations.
And the main reason that people do it, is it fair to say, is to keep wealth or assets in the hands of some and away from others?
Yeah, control of assets is definitely one of the key things, but they're used by small business owners, whether they're plumbers, farmers, restaurateurs, anybody starting a new business. And they're also used extensively by people starting new relationships who want to keep their pre-relationship property and their assets separate from relationship property that mingles over time, because not everything always works out.
That's right. And for businesses, is it that they don't want, if the business goes badly, they don't want the creditors to be able to come after their personal house or something? Is that?
Yes, again, that's broadly correct, although there's an element of saying, look, there's only so much I'm prepared to risk when I start this new business. And if you said to people, well, you have to risk everything, they have to be able to go after your family home, you'll have fewer people starting new businesses. So you have to get that balance right.
Right, okay. And the bad news for anyone who has a trust is that the tax rate is going up to 39%, right?
That's correct. So it's changing from 33, where it's been for decades. Now, on its face, that's a reasonable thing if everyone who's a beneficiary is earning over 180,000, because they should have been paying 39% tax under the new rules anyway, and the government's explanation is they're trying to close any potential for a loophole. Now, the unintended consequences, of course, most people who are beneficiaries of trust don't earn $180,000, and the 39% tax rate kicks in at the first dollar. So you have lots of people who would otherwise be paying 33 or some blended rate lower than that, who are now going to be looking at a tax of up to 39% on every dollar the trust makes.
Right. So my grandma has a trust that's left me and my siblings or cousins or whatever some property.
Yep.
It's earning some money. Even if I'm on the minimum wage, that income will be taxed at the rich man's tax rate of 39%.
Yeah, correct, based on what's proposed at the moment. Now, there is potential, and the IRD has spoken about this, to make distributions to those people during any tax year. There's also been controversy about that, with people saying that's effectively tax avoidance. So it is a complex area, and we haven't quite seen the final version. Submissions are still open. It's still got to go through select committee. Everyone's admitted that there are going to have to be tweaks to make the law fit for purpose, and we haven't quite seen what that final is. So until the final is out, it's very hard to know exactly how it will impact.
But as it sits right now, you'd have to say that that is pretty unfair on those people who would be in that particular situation.
In that particular situation, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Speaking to the fairness of very high net worth people who have been using the tax difference to potentially minimise tax, that's a different question from saying the vast bulk of New Zealanders who aren't paying that rate who are now going to get stung.
Do you think that has been happening, what the government claims, where those who are on the high tax rate of 39% have been putting income through trust so they pay the lower rate?
Well, there's been a very significant jump in the amount of income being declared by trusts, so that is the implication the government has drawn. I haven't seen, because it hasn't been released, all of the detail behind that analysis, so it'll be interesting to see whether people are really doing that or people have just said, look, the whole world of trust law is changing, I need to start putting the assets into appropriate structures, and that would have also driven up that rate.
If you have a bunch of beneficiaries of the trust who earn significantly less, as Ryan was saying, maybe they're all minimum wage earners, is there something they can do to bring that tax rate down? Could they take it out of the trust? Could they move their assets around a little bit?
Well, again, you get into some grey areas where the IRD has put out some advice and then there have been people suggesting that potentially this is tax avoidance, but there are options to distribute trust during somebody's year so that it comes out while you're still on that minimum wage, and therefore you would then pay the lower rate.
Right.
However, the problem with that is you're forcing a trust to distribute assets instead of building them up and trying to keep them together, which may defeat the purpose of the trust. Again, remember, a lot of these are used for intergenerational family wealth, to hold on to a house or a property so that people have the benefit of it as grandchildren, to make sure people are set up to try and get their kids through. There are all sorts of reasons, or potentially, again, to limit liability when you start a new business. If you're spitting out every single dollar to avoid paying 39%, you do run the risk that you effectively invalidate the trust, and then you may save the 6%, but you may end up losing 100% of the asset that's generating that income in the first place.
A couple of quick questions from our viewers this morning. This one is from David. I'd like to know if you need an accountant to submit any sort of annual report or tax return for a family trust, and how much might this cost? Thank you, says David.
Yeah, no problem at all, David. It's a very good question. For almost all trusts, you're going to need professional advice. An accountant is usually part of that. Almost all trusts will be required to have some form of accounts. Technically, I guess you can do them yourself, but I would not recommend it. I'd recommend getting experts, and whether it's us or people like us, there are lots of good advisors out in the market. For most trusts, accounts will be somewhere in the vicinity of $800 to $1,200 a year. Again, that will rise with complexity. And speaking of complexity, one of the issues here is, of course, we are adding complexity into the trust matrix that will only really affect those who aren't particularly wealthy. If you are a very wealthy person, adding another $1,000 or $500 of compliance costs is not a problem. If you have a trust for other reasons that most ordinary New Zealanders do, the extra compliance costs can hurt.
What advice could you provide to Michael Wood?
Okay. So look, I obviously don't know the specifics of the minister's trust deed or his arrangements. What I can say is that with any politician or any business leader, they also fall in the same boat. The idea of a conflict of interest is a problem. And the perception of a conflict of an interest is enough to trigger that sense that, well, this isn't right. The person's decisions may not be purely made for their own self-interest. So what people usually do is create a blind trust. So when they join Parliament, they put their assets into a blind trust, and they then never see those assets again. They do not know whether those shares have been churned over, they may have been sold and bought for Fisher & Paykel Healthcare or Goodman or whatever. And so when they're making decisions, they don't know whether the decision is in their financial interest or not. They just know that it's the right decision as they see it. So you'll remember John Key did this pretty successfully. That worked well for him. You'll also remember Donald Trump refused, and that created quite a lot of controversy throughout his presidency.
Can you, because I always wondered with the blind trust, can you peek a little bit, you know? Who's in control of who's making you blind? Who's put the blindfold on?
Certainly one where we're running it, no. That is always an accusation, but a properly run trust with good advisors, good trustees around them, that won't happen. And frankly, for somebody like Key, it's really important that you believe that it's blind.
Yeah.
So any sense of impropriety is a problem, so no, it's very hard.
All right. Hey, really interesting. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate your time. There are more questions from our viewers. Some of them we might have to reply to individually, I'm afraid.
Well, the other one is send them to me. I'm very happy to reply to them offline.
Good on you. That is Patrick Gamble, the Perpetual Gardens CEO, with us this morning at 22 after 8.